From Santa Barbara, California, the Timeless Voyager series, where the knowledge is timeless and you are the Voyager. Interviews with leading-edge authors and speakers, psychic phenomena and the unexplained, UFOs, extraterrestrial encounters, government cover-ups, alternative healthcare, new technologies. Fasten your cosmic seatbelts and join me, your host, Bruce Stephen Holmes, the Timeless Voyager.
Hello everyone, this is Bruce Stephen Holmes, Timeless Voyager Radio, and with me today for the second time in about 3 years, it's been a while, Robert A. Monroe of the Monroe Institute. For those of you who are listening, Robert A. Monroe is probably the man who brought the concept of the out-of-body experience into the mainstream through a number of his books, probably the most well-known, Journeys Out of the Body and Far Journeys.
Oh, fine, Bruce. How are you been?
I've been fine, and it's really wonderful to hear you again out there. For listeners, maybe we could just give a quick little summary of the work that you do out there and perhaps how you even began the Monroe Institute. I realize that's a big question, and maybe we could just kind of run through that for a few moments.
Well, it's very, very answerable. We are, all of us in our lives are subject to change. If there's nothing more than growing older, we are subject to change. And once in a while, a massive change occurs in someone's life. And that took is what happened with me all the way back in 1958, which is quite a while ago. And at that time, since 1956, my company, which had been very active in network programming, we in turn were researching means of, why I don't know at the time, I don't remember, means of helping people learn during sleep. And in that process, we had begun to put together various sound patterns, and being very expert and professional in sound, we thought we could use those, first of all, to help people get to sleep, and second, to put together data that would in turn be able to be absorbed by the individual during the sleep state. I was one of the principal subjects in this experimentation beginning in about 1956. The net result, and it is pretty much the consensus all these many years later, after probably about 100 tests in that, I developed a pattern of vibration that I couldn't understand. It was like a body shaking without actually shaking. And I finally got acclimated to the fact that there was not anything dangerous after a visit to a physician. And then subsequently I would get to the point where it would begin somewhat when I would lie down to sleep. And one particular night back in 1958, after I was waiting there one night to wait for this to get over so that I could go to sleep, suddenly I found myself bumping against the ceiling. And the cause of that was the trigger, evidently. The consensus in later years now is that was the trigger.
What does the term trigger mean?
Well, it means the catalyst, the causative factor that releases something. Very interesting thing that relates to that. For the previous 2 years from that, we've found that I had a recurring dream, which I didn't think anything about because being an airplane pilot, I had this dream where I would taxi along the taxiway, turn and go into takeoff along the runway. And as soon as I got off the runway, I would find myself not over a runway, but over a street. And above me, over the street, were the typical telephone wires, phone wires, cable, electric cable, and everything else. And I would fly along trying to find a hole through which I could get through under this, when I was under this network of wires. And finally, after much frustration trying to find the hole, I would land the airplane and wake up. And once I started having this out-of-body state activity, that dream disappeared completely and never had it again.
Now, so your assumption then is that dream was what just a way of describing to yourself the actual feeling of being out of the body?
Well, I don't know. It was a precursor to that. I hadn't. First of all, I was not at that time, and nor now, of course. I was not heavily into alcohol nor drugs, and I was a workaholic, perhaps, but. And I had no particular religious bent. I had very little studies in philosophy behind me, some in college, and that's about all.
So your feeling about this experience, I guess you probably kept it a little quiet then to yourself?
What was that?
You probably kept this experience to yourself.
Very much so. Here I was running 2 or 3 respectable businesses, and at the time that in New York was a weirdo type of thing. So I made no mention to anyone when it started, and it was totally uncontrollable, this out-of-body state. And I went through the first step, was a thorough physical exam, and my doctor said I had no brain tumor, which is the thing that one looked for, and that I had no particular other physical things that would have created it. And so he just gave me some sedatives and says, go home. Anyway, the next step was that, and I'm still trying, at that point, I was still trying very much to control it. The next step came when I had a psychiatrist friend named Louis Wohlberg who had one of the largest psychiatric clinics in New York City, and we were social friends. And I finally got the courage to ask him what this was, and he thought for a minute, and he says, well, I think you're doing conscious dreaming. And I asked him, well, Larry, what was that? What is that? And he says, I don't know, I just made it up.
Well, that's great.
And so we had a good laugh. I finally got the courage to talk to a psychologist friend, and he looked at me and he says, well, what do you want to do about it? And I says, well, what is it? How is it? And he says, oh, they know all about that stuff over in India. I says, in India? And he says, yeah, they do it all the time. And I said, well, what do I do about it? And Brad said, well, the best thing I can say is that you should go on over to India and stay in an ashram and study under a guru. And being very much of a Western mind, I said, well, how long will that take? He says, well, I don't know, 10 to 20 years, something like that. And I thought of my businesses and my mortgaged house and my wife and 2 children, and I thought, how do I do that? And I asked Brad what he would do if this were happening to him. Would he go to India? And he looked at me with this very smug look and said, it's your problem, not mine. And that was the end of that one.
So you're getting lots of help from people around you, right?
A lot of help. And these were in areas where I thought our world of science could begin to help. Being stubborn and out of dire necessity, I had my company, and we had been doing this R&D in sound, so I put them to work on trying to find out what this was that was happening to me. Meanwhile, I'm trying desperately to keep it under control. Well, we got the usual information that this thing, or what I was doing, was what they called back in somewhere in a couple hundred years ago, and it had come forward, called astral projection. And this disturbed my Western mind very much, so another psychologist friend and I, a year or so later, decided to call it out-of-body experiences, or OBE. And so since that time, it's been generically called that. And it took about a year for me to get the thing under control where I could stop it or start it whenever I wanted. And it took a year, that same year also, for me to conduct enough experiments to satisfy myself, no one else, that in turn it was a real thing instead of an hallucination.
So you really were kind of like the mad scientist experimenting on himself.
I had no choice. Necessity is a very powerful tool. Anyway, trying to keep it very short, once I, learned it wouldn't kill me, second, when I learned that it was real by just nice, neat cause and effect tests and going to places and verifying and things like that, then I lost that fear, and I got curious, and that's worse than being fearful, I'd tell you that. So, in looking at that, so I set up this R&D division in my company to begin to find out more things about it. And there's a whole series of patterns that we began to learn about what was happening around in the country at that time. And at that time, there was the infant parapsychology world. And we investigated that and found a number of patterns in that seemed to be interesting. One of the key glowing figures in that era in the field of parapsychology was a J.B. Rhine. And having some business interests in North Carolina, it was very easy to make a date with J.B. Rhine. And on a Saturday morning, and I'm usually down there by air anyway during the week out of New York, and I greeted him, or he greeted me, and we sat down and I told him about that and what was happening to me, and I must confess at that time I had it much more under control, and I could speak much more knowledgeably about it.
You were actually learning then how to, let's say, I don't know, let's call it drive it or move it around. You were becoming comfortable.
Meaning do what you want with it instead of it doing what it wanted with me. It's a lot of difference. But anyway, J.B. Rhine thought it was very interesting, and he said, well, it's not his department. And I thanked him very much. He was much into determining psychic abilities by guessing what cards are in a sequence and stuff like that. So anyway, that only increased our determination to conduct some research and finding out on our own. So we began to develop patterns, and it was that through the years, that started in '59, that eventually, all the way forward, and much happened in between, but in 1985, well, it was before that, 1975, that R&D division actually became the Monroe Institute, and it was then in 1985, some almost 7 years ago, was separated from the corporation and became a non-profit organization, educational research organization. And so the Institute in itself has been active for about 15 years, and we've had in the 60s and 70s, we had a very, very profound research program in which we began to use the very sound patterns I started with and expanded upon those to help induce other people to, in turn, begin such stuff as out-of-body, and we were quite successful at doing it.
You know, in our last interview, I think that was something that I had mentioned to you, and I guess maybe to be more, to clear it up or be clearer about the question, do these principles work on everyone, or does each person have a different sound beating principle that helps them achieve this state?
Well, we've gone so far past that in the last 10 years as to exactly that. We don't make a point of deliberately attempting to induce an out-of-body state. We take care of a certain other basics first, and one of those basics, of course, is fear. And we had developed very fine techniques of alleviating and setting aside fears relative to such things.
Now, fear, for our listeners, I think this is a very important point, and I think we should stop for a moment and explain the fact that we're talking about a very major emotion here that's certainly tied into quote unquote the out-of-body experience.
Yeah, you have to understand that all of us are living here with a basic survival imprint, and that survival imprint says live, exist, take care of yourself first, reproduce so that you maintain the species. That's the what I call the Earth Life System command, and that's all through all life here. And but that basic command, as it were, that imprint, has the connotation of survival here in physical life. It has anything beyond that. It has the fear of death attached to it. And so being, quote, out of your body indicates that you're dying. And so that's where the conflict arises, the fear generated by this physical life.
So you have different types of programs that help people work with fear and alleviate that?
Oh yes, that's been it's a sort of an automatic process with us, the question of fear and dealing with it, and also all the normal worries, anxieties, and concerns that are not necessarily related to fear, but are built into it a great deal. This whole process of what we fear.
So fear it actually impedes the process of the out-of-body experience, doesn't it?
Indeed, it very much does. And so we have sort of a slow process, and slow meaning a step-by-step process where we help people understand, control, and definitely alleviate the fear that may be preventing them from even performing properly here in this world.
Okay, now this is an interesting point because I think there's two things that have come up, and I want those people who are listening to hear these 2 points. First, you actually have addressed why we should travel astrally, or at least to have the out-of-body experience, and we're going to talk about that in great detail here because I think it makes it very pragmatic. And the second thing is that a lot of people probably wonder if the whole thing is just a simply self-induced hallucination. Why don't we address that?
Well, let's take the hallucination. I had to go through that because I'm a very pragmatic left-brain person. And I still am, as far as that's concerned. I have a nice blend. And I might add that first and foremost of all, that analytical self of me has been, I don't believe this, I know the difference. Because that left brain of mine, that analytical self will say, what's going on here? And needs to find answers. And so what we do is provide answers for that left brain. Hallucination, the best way you can verify that it is not an hallucination is to go to a distant point, and that may be only in the next room or it can be 5,000 miles away, and, quote, do something. And whatever you do is another matter. Back in the early days, I found the simplest way is to pinch somebody while I was there, and that got their attention. And that person, not even knowing I was going to be there at that time, didn't know that I was the one doing the gentle pinch. You can observe surroundings and activity at another place in very great detail, and great detail means you can go and perceive it from overhead, you can go down to one side or around it, whatever is taking place, and you could observe it. You can see it, and its seeing is another form, of course, but you can perceive it, you can hear sounds. I have not ever been able to feel anything like heat or something like that.
So these actually turn out to be proofs in a way.
They're very solid, definitive proof. Do this, and the best way is what is a blind type of study where it is an event or an incident or a locale about which I know absolutely nothing and be able to go there. And we've had other people doing the same thing, so don't misunderstand. This is not limited to me. The great thing is, as soon as we got in the 60s, and early 70s, we had a team of people who were very, very proficient at this along with me. And they developed all sorts of evidential data, too. And it's one thing to have an hallucination, and you think it is, anyway, in your own mind, and you satisfy it to yourself, and that's the most important one. We did not set out to prove this to the world. This has not ever been our whole goal, has not been to prove it to the world. But we do know, not believe, that anyone can prove what we say to themselves.
So this is probably the most important point here, namely that this is a subjective experience, and there's no point to spending all of your time trying to objectively prove it.
Well, the point is, you can convert it into an objective experience. That's my whole point. And the moment you do that, then you'd be surprised how much different it becomes, and how much fun it becomes is another way. And you could go to all sorts of elaborate lengths to prove these things to yourself. And this is back since the 70s. Well, we've had several thousand people who have been able to do this in their own way once we gave them the tools to do it.
This is Bruce Stephen Holmes, and we are speaking today with Robert A. Monroe of the Monroe Institute. And the Institute's work is in the field of human consciousness enhancement. And, of course, he is probably one of the most gifted authors on certainly the out-of-body experience, having written two very well-known books, The Journeys Out of the Body and Far Journeys. Let's move away from that for a moment. I understand that some very exciting things have emerged now at the Institute in the past 2 years, and I wonder if you could tell us about a few of them.
Well, it depends on which one you want to talk about. Well, I could give you the key one that's kind of fun. We had been using a measurement system that was a variation of biofeedback in the 70s, and then in about the mid-80s or thereabouts, through the grace of a nice donor, we were able to get a 20-channel EEG piece of equipment that was all computerized so that we could cut it up and chew it around however we wanted to do it. And one of the earliest things that we verified was most interesting. Now, bear in mind that we've been developing systems of learning, and these systems of learning were all based on different stages of consciousness that are not just purely physical. And one of the key thing that we found was that these states of consciousness that we were inducing, and they are consciousness, were occurring during what would be thought of as ordinary sleep. And so therefore the EEGs, the brainwave patterns of our people, when they were performing these functions, were very indicative or typical of various stages of sleep. The fascinating thing was to get a researcher who was coming as a visitor, and I happened to be there at one time, where we had a subject in the lab, and we do have our own laboratory. We've had it for, again, 15, 18 years. And this subject in the lab is, these brainwave patterns are coming out, and the visiting researcher indicates, oh, he's in delta sleep. And I say, well, that may be. And so what we do is put the subjects in an isolated booth. And so we would push the button and say, hey, Freddie, how are you doing? And after a moment, Freddie would say, well, it is kind of puzzling here. I've run into something, and he'd go on and tell about it. Get out of delta sleep. And this.
So now, for our listeners, what's happening here then is that you're actually monitoring in real time the experience the person is having while they're supposedly asleep.
That's right. But the point is that all these years we had been developing, had been working with stages of sleep, and we had just merrily passed it by. Even in about 1976 or 77, we did.
The most important point here is that by using this EEG machine, you're absolutely scientifically positive that the person is sleeping.
That's right.
I just didn't want that to go by the listeners. I want them to know that we're talking about something that is now verifiable.
Yes, well, this has been quite a exciting subject, of course, because as you well know, Bruce, one of the biggest still mysteries in human life is the third of the time that we spend here sleeping. And in spite of all the scientific studies, we, as a civilization, we really don't know what sleep is, or even really only partially why it is. There's a researcher out your way, Bill DeMint, up at Stanford, indicated that during sleep, and he is one of the prime sleep researchers in the United States, but he indicated that he utilized it this way, and he said that, and he did it in a paper, I believe, that the human brain has two sets of workers. One is the day crew, and that's the one that's in operation when you are awake, and there's a night crew when you are asleep, and that the night crew is entirely different from the day crew, so that the night crew even has a different set of language, words, if you call them that, communication, and different rules and things from the day crew. And this was very interesting because he also went on to state that the human brain during sleep is over twice as biochemically and electrically active than it is during waking. Now, he went on to attribute, of course, that much of that was repairs and maintenance, but that tremendous activity during sleep of what we think of as unconsciousness. Now, here we are moving into that and associating our day crew, as it were, with the night crew, as according to Bill DeMett, and that's according to us, but according to his look at it.
So there's some type of synchrony. You're developing some type of synchrony between these two crews, so to speak.
That's right, exactly, and that's why it is a learning process to get acquainted with the night crew. Now, mind you, that's still you, that night crew. It's no apparition or whatever. It's a very much another part of you, and we find that most fascinating because it fits in greatly with the problem of moving into these other states of consciousness, simply because of the fact that you encounter so many things or composites or types of thinking that are not they're not appropriate, as it were, to this day crew. And so it is a very much of a learning process to associate those two together. It's most fascinating how that has in interpretation has suffered much throughout all of human history, and here we're taking it in an entirely different way.
Now, there's a title for this program, right?
Huh?
Is this a particular program or just something?
No, that's just generally in all of the things that we've been doing to date. We've been working with the variations of sleep. Our 15-year-old gateway program. Give you an idea how that compares. We are the first stage of that, and this is a week-long program. People learn how to go to what we call Focus 10, and our description of that is mind awake and body asleep. Well, that's very easily the lower part of stage 1 sleep. The brain waves consistently show that. It isn't just one time. This is very consistent.
And we are talking mostly today about the out-of-body experience. Robert, you had something you wanted to continue with.
Oh, yes. I was covering this interesting diversion that we got in discovering that we actually, our systems of learning were actually learning during sleep. And I thought it's an interesting paradox in view of how this all got started many years ago. The other part is that the thing that somebody looked over our shoulder and said, well, you do know what you have, don't you? And I said, no. And he says, there are 85 million people in the United States alone who suffer from sleep deprivation because they can't get to sleep. And there are 30 million of those who are under prescription drugs in order to get to sleep. And I said, well, why don't you offer this system to the public? And indeed, this year, Bruce, that's what we're going to do. We have a nice label for it. We call it Time Out. So you take time out for sleep. And it'll emerge initially in an album of 4 of our particular sleep tapes, which in turn, as sleep tapes, are 4 different ways that it'll help you get to sleep. And these will begin probably being heard on TV in your area, probably sometime early spring. And the other thing is that later on, probably early next year, we will have hardware that will do the same thing without tape.
So this is for people who are quote unquote insomniacs.
That's right. And we did a test some time ago with 45 insomniacs, and they went onto our system of audio tape for a month and found that in turn that 40 of the 45 found that our system was at least as good as the sleep that they were getting out of a halcyon or something like that. So this was very interesting, and it's a change for us in the sense that having something that is of wide value in the public marketplace, as it were.
Let's talk about some of these programs, the Inner Circle.
Well, Inner Circle is a very, and I don't like the word exclusive, but it's a group of people who in turn are the ones who are the first to test new types of hemisync problems. And hemisync is sort of a trade name for the type of sound that we've developed. And they test these different ones, and they're all very talented subjects who can in turn get back to us some of the responses for these very unique waveforms. These are indeed unique. We've begun to use a lot of them in the last year or two within our programs ourselves, and the Gateway program, and it's now in its 16th year or something like that, and over 6,000 people have been through that program utilizing some of our older patterns. They've been that effective, but this year we're going to put a bunch of new waveforms in it that we've gotten basically out of this brainwave brain mapping machine that we have that's got 20 channels that makes very excellent isolation patterns that we can use to find this. And this all sounds like we're trying to prove something to the world, but we're just trying to emerge with something of value other than just pure research in what we're doing.
All right, how about the Gifted and Talented Subjects program?
Well, that is done where we take anyone who does have and that's sort of like going fishing, as it were. People who express an ability to do anything you've ever heard of in terms of mental talents or abilities, whether it be psychokinesis, which is the ability to move objects, or another one who can do diagnostic work on a physical body, all these kinds of things. And we bring these people in and we brain map them, you see, which is most important, to find out what brain patterns they're using. Not just, and also, of course, to verify whether they can or cannot do what they purport to be able to do.
So you in a sense make a model.
What? Make a what?
You make a model.
That's right.
And then once you've got that model, then you study it and see if you can recreate that in another person.
Exactly. And it's most fascinating how when you really find a subject who in turn can do that, can perform certain functions, we will find 2 or 3 that can do this, and then we take an average of their EEG and utilize that, convert it over to sound. It's very fascinating stuff. I think we have over 100 such waveforms that we're trying piece by piece to get into the testing format, and that's part of the Inner Circle. They test these for us, you see. Very exciting stuff.
Robert, let's take a moment and let's talk a little bit about Hemisync. I think people would probably be very interested in how that works. Maybe we just give a quick little scenario.
It's very easy. Hemisync is a system of sound, and which is original with us only in how we use it. We use what's called a binaural beat, and that is not original with us. It goes way back. Where one sound is put in one ear and another sound is put in another ear, and the binaural beat that is created between the two. For example, if you had a 100 hertz signal in one ear and a 200 hertz signal in the other ear, there would be a 100 hertz differential between the two, and that beat frequency is generated in the brain itself. It's not a sound, as it were.
So in other words, the ear is actually not hearing anything, is it?
No, the ear is not hearing anything at all. For example, we can go down and use something as low as 10 hertz, which means if you had a 100 hertz signal and 110, the differential would be 10 hertz. And the human ear, except for rare cases, can't hear that at all. the deepest thunder. This is below the deepest thunder sound that you've ever heard.
Now, this is where you discovered for example, 10 hertz, for instance, is very close to delta. Is that correct?
No, 10 hertz is in the alpha state. That's right in the upper alpha range, as a matter of fact.
Where is delta then?
Delta is about 0.5 hertz to around 3.
Okay, so my mistake.
That's way down in there.
But the point being that you can actually cause elicit that state with the sound.
Oh yes, that's what we use in our sleep patterns, because we can use a binaural beat by getting the actual brainwave form out of a delta sleep and putting it in as one of the sleep-inducing patterns. It's very, very effective. We take an average of 10 or 20 subjects even and get the average of that one. We don't just use one person's brainwave form.
All right. Now, and of course, that's why you were saying you've got new waveforms that you're introducing all the time.
That's right. Mm-hmm.
All right. Sometimes I wonder, how can we trust you, Robert?
What do you mean, how you can trust me? I can put it another way. As far as our sleep-producing patterns are concerned, this has been tested in a number of different ways. We have one, for example, that we've had for 7 years now, called a catnapper, and I think that there's an excess of 100,000 people have been using catnapper, maybe more than that, over the years. And what it does, it produces a 30-minute catnap, and it's great for avoiding jet lag when you go across country, across oceans. It's used very intensely for that purpose. The person puts it on an hour before he gets to his destination, and when he comes out of it, he's had a complete transformation in what you might call the best way you can describe it is he's had a change in his circadian rhythm, then up and refreshed.
All right, let's talk about the Lifeline program. I think people are ready now.
You think so?
I think so.
Oh, well, Lifeline. Well, in Lifeline, Bruce, this is kind of a interesting culmination of a lot of what we've been doing through the years, for the simple reason that it makes us illustrate how much of a rebel that we really are. Here, all through man's recorded history, he's offered pleas, P-L-E-A-S, and supplication, prayers, and everything. Here, he offers those to get help from there. What the Lifeline thing that you're talking about is a means where we here give help to those there. And those there are people who are aimlessly or terribly in trouble immediately after physical death. And so we had tested this in a number of different ways and finally came up with what we call lifelines, which, without reading through a paper, I can do it in a paraphrasing form. Mind you, we take Gateway graduates because they are well prepared to do this, and Gateway takes people on and gets them very familiar with the edge of what we might call time-space. Lifeline goes beyond that, and we've had 3 sessions now of this, and it's been spectacularly successful, because one of the things, the key thing is to give a participant something to do there, and that changes things immensely. What does he do? He goes into what we call Focus 23, which is an area where humans have just departed this earth, and they are trying to figure out where they are, what they're doing, and escorts those, assists them, retrieves them, takes them up to what we call Focus 27, which is a way station, a reception center. We didn't put it together. It's there, deliberately designed to get a newly dead human into a posture where they're in a familiar surrounding. It looks like an Earth-like. It's a park with trees and walks and grass and flowers and a little running water. And we did not put it there, but we are using it. And so what we do, we take people up there so that they can cool off, as it were, from the trauma of dying. And what we do in turn, this gets fun, they're trained to do this. Our participants are trained to, as they do this, as they make this retrieval and put these people into the reception, along the way they very gently query what their name is, where they're from, what happened, and about their family, so that we have hard data that we can return over to an analysis section for verification. And this works fine on people who have just died. It gets a little problematical when it's over in someplace over in the middle of an African desert where a woman's died in a near deserted African village. This kind of thing, that makes it almost impossible. But think of it, they are retrieving this information, and then we go and verify it. The interesting question then is, how many times does a person need that type of verification in what they do to let them not believe that they survive physical death, but know it? Once, 5, 10 times, 20 times? Because when they go home, they continue to do this. The other part is, how many times does a culture need this to take place and be verified before they begin to look seriously at the fact that we really do survive physical death?
So the important, there are a lot of things here that you brought up. We have to slow down for a second, Robert.
Yeah.
Of course, the listeners who listen to Timeless Voyager Radio are very well aware of the fact that, we're talking about this edge here. We're talking about the, let's call it the other side. You refer to it as there.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So you call here where we are now and there where they are.
That's a very, very simplistic definition. I'm very much trying to avoid any convoluted descriptions.
Okay, so this Focus 23 is definitely a spot where, I'm going to say this, lost souls are.
Well, yeah.
These are souls that, for some strange reason, do not know they're dead.
Some of them don't know they're dead. Some are in a state of shock. Others are bewildered because they don't know what to do next. Some are just virtually unconscious, just floating around, the best way to describe it.
All right, and so then what you do is these people that are working in your from the Gateways programs, people who are adept at this particular experience, are sent out to retrieve or harvest these people and bring them to Focus 27, which is a reception area.
That's correct. And then they're taken care of there. And it is, the most important thing is that it's not based on a belief system. It's a know system. In other words, you could perform this, and the people going there are not being involved in a belief system. It is not religious, is what I'm trying to say. It is they can opt to go to the Christian heaven or the pearly gates after that if they so desire, but it lets them cool down. They get a chance to think, and they can also do the very common thing, and that's return and be another human.
All right, can anybody participate in this Lifeline program?
They can, provided they go through the gateway first, because the gateway is essential to the ability to move in from, say, 21 to 23.
Can we talk a little bit about that?
Well, you see, as I said, 21 is on the edge of physical time-space, and it's all based in that area. When you go to 23, you are in completely your whole consciousness is totally in another environment. The interesting thing about that, in performing this function, and we train them to do this, that's part of it, to go to 23 and then go past 24 through 27 through 26. That's the belief system territory, as we call it, and then go to 27. And the most fascinating thing is that all of these, we're talking about some 70 people, have performed this without any fear whatsoever. And this is very important, not any fear. The second thing is, and we are talking about analytical objectivity, they did it with complete detachment. In other words, they did not get emotional about it. And in other words, they were very calm and deliberate instead of being all scattered. And they ran into some very heavy things. You know, here's a guy cut up in an airplane crash, and his head's over there and his arm's over there, and he's standing there looking very bewildered at, what do I do now? And here's blood all over the place, this kind of thing. The interesting part, though, they did hold that detachment all the way through these exercises, but when they came back and opened their physical eyes, they had tears running down their face. Fascinating?
Definitely very fascinating. Now, let's move away from this one for one moment, because we're going to run out of time if I don't hit this. Let's talk about the Time Out program.
Yes. Well, the Time Out, as I said, is basically it is a program. It's an in-home program. It's not a program that we do here at the center. It is simply helping people get to sleep.
Okay, I'm sorry. I guess I misunderstood that one. So you're training people to be able to sleep. Those people who have lost touch with how to sleep without, let's say, without medication.
That's right, with no medication whatsoever, and it's inordinately successful.
Now, these are pretty exotic programs we have talked about. I noticed there is one thing you've done with Hemisync that I think a lot of listeners would be interested in, and that is you have now begun a general application using Hemisync for chemical dependencies. Can we talk about that a little bit?
I can only talk generally about it. As they say, that's not my department. But we have what we call a professional division, and that's made up mostly of either MDs, psychiatrists, psychologists, and a number of them have done that. I know of one set of psychiatrists in Washington, D.C., who in turn use this system that we have very much for about 4 months, and of, I think, 9 patients that they had, 7 of them were completely free of any drug or alcohol dependency in the end of that period of time.
Now, you have a journal, an actual journal, Hemisync Journal.
That's true, but it covers a broad band of areas. I can give you one that's getting increasingly active, for example, on the West Coast, the same application of the system and methods. We call it the Emergency Series, which is used during surgery. And a surgical patient using this pattern, and we have no exceptions when it's used as it's designed, a person needs only, first of all, they go into surgery in a very, very calm state instead of anxiety-ridden. Second, you see, there's first of all, one that this starts at the pre-op level. It doesn't start in the OR itself. In the OR, they listen to a tape during their entire surgery, and they require only half as much of any anesthesia that is normally required. And of course, we have to instruct the OR staff to know about this. And then in recovery, they 90% of them come out of the operation in recovery exactly on schedule, 45 minutes from the time the tape is started, and they're completely conscious. And only, I think 90% of them have had no pain. And we're in depth of about 300 patients that we've been able to track. So this is a very profound thing. Recuperative time is cut in half as a result of this whole thing we call emergency treatment.
All right, now we're starting to run out of time, and I want to make sure we get a few things in here. First of all, you have, I understand, a new book coming out.
It's called Ultimate Journey, and it'll be out sometime this year. I'm not exactly sure of the publishing date. But it's a recap of my later activity, and it does include how I got around to Lifelines, incidentally, and put it together, and some of the preliminary activity that I went into to find out about it. And but it is a recap of a lot of the things that have taken place since Far Journeys came out. That's about the best way I can describe it. It does deal very, very much with the whole concept of what we really are, and that, for example, that consciousness is a continuum. We are always conscious. That if we lose consciousness here, quote, we are conscious somewhere else, and I call it along a spectrum of consciousness. So that in that spectrum, I don't know where it ends. It goes off to infinity as far as I'm concerned. But when we are asleep here, for example, we are conscious elsewhere along that spectrum. And that's very provable. And a number of the professional members are working in that premise right now.
Tell me what your expectations and visions are for the future.
I think that there has to be a major change in human consciousness. Otherwise, we won't survive. It's that simple. And I'll pose the question to anyone who's listening, which makes it interesting, and they can cogitate on it. And what single event or influence or whatever could cause the following things? And if we look on a projection, it should be within the next 9 years. Item 1, remove all political boundaries. 2, remove all social boundaries. 3, all racial boundaries. 4, all economic boundaries. And 5, all religious boundaries, because that's what it's going to take. Otherwise, there's a strong possibility that the human race as we know it will plateau out and fall down, and some other species here will take over after another 1,000 years.
Robert, thank you so much for being on the show.
Well, it's been my real pleasure.
And I'd like to thank all of you for tuning in Timeless Voyager Radio. This is Bruce Stephen Holmes, and I hope that your own personal voyage through life towards the development of your highest potential is a joyous and successful one.